Have you ever wondered what secrets might be buried beneath the oldest churches in America? Imagine stepping inside a place that everyone calls holy, only to discover it was built on centuries of blood. This is the story of Claire Whitaker, who thought she was taking a simple job cataloging historical records and ended up fighting for her sanity. Late one November evening, Claire stumbled out of St. Brigid's Abbey in upstate New York. Her face was white as chalk. Her hands were smeared with something dark and sticky. She was clutching an old, leather-bound journal, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. When the local sheriff's deputies tried to speak to her, she could only whisper one sentence before collapsing. They said it was God's work, but it was never God watching us down there. 3 weeks earlier, Claire had arrived in the quiet town of Marlow Hill. She was a graduate student in religious history, eager to begin her project, to digitize centuries of archives stored in St. Brigid's Abbey. The abbey itself was an imposing stone structure built in 1792. Locals said the original founders were Irish immigrants who brought with them relics and rituals older than Christianity. From the outside, the place seemed serene. A line of arched windows, ivy curling around the bell tower, golden afternoon light spilling across the flagstone courtyard. Mother Agnes, the abbess, greeted her with a tight smile and a cool, searching gaze. "You'll find we treasure our privacy here," she said, her voice low and almost rehearsed. "There are rooms you will not need to enter." Claire thought it was an odd warning, but she had no reason to suspect anything sinister. After all, she was just here to scan old prayer books. But that first night, as she lay in her small guest room under a heavy quilt, she heard something that would echo in her dreams for weeks. A slow, rhythmic chanting, rising up from somewhere beneath the chapel floor. At first she tried to tell herself it was a recording, a relic of some ancient ritual. But then she heard the chanting break into desperate sobbing. The next morning, Claire approached Sister Helena, the youngest of the nuns, to ask about it. Helena's eyes darted toward the chapel doors before she leaned closer. "Don't listen to it," she whispered. "That's how it starts." "How what starts?" Claire pressed. But Helena only shook her head and turned away. It was enough to plant a seed of dread in Claire's mind. She tried to distract herself with her work. In the Abbey library, she discovered records dating back to 1803. Baptism registries, death notices, ledgers written in a crabbed hand. And then she found the first evidence that something was terribly wrong. A ledger marked sanctified offerings, listing names of parishioners who had volunteered for purification. Beside each name was a date and a notation in Latin: Sanguis Immaculatus, immaculate blood. Claire felt cold as she turned the pages. The dates went on, spanning almost 200 years. Some of the names matched the surnames she had seen on mailboxes in town. That night, Claire could hardly sleep. Every creak of the old beams overhead sounded like someone moving just beyond her door. She tried to convince herself she was imagining things, but by morning, she was determined to know the truth. She waited until the nuns gathered for morning prayers. Then she slipped into the chapel alone. The air was cooler here, laced with the scent of old incense and something metallic she couldn't quite place. Her footsteps echoed across the black and white tiles as she walked toward the altar. She pressed her palm against the stone floor. It felt hollow. Carefully, she traced her fingers along the seam where the tiles met the wooden dais. There, a narrow gap, barely visible. She wedged the edge of her pocket knife into it and pried it upward. The tiles shifted with a dull groan. Beneath it was a recessed iron ring. Claire's heart thundered in her chest as she grasped the ring and lifted. A square panel swung open, revealing a rough-hewn tunnel descending into darkness. Cool air gusted up from below, carrying that same metallic tang, like rust or blood. For a moment, she thought about closing the hatch and pretending she had never seen it. But something inside her insisted she had come this far for a reason. So she switched on her flashlight, took a breath, and stepped down into the dark. The tunnel was narrower than she expected, the walls damp with condensation. Her boots scraped over ancient stone steps as she descended deeper into the Abbey's hidden underbelly. About 20 feet down, the passage opened into a vaulted chamber. Her light swept across crude murals painted directly onto the walls. Scenes of hooded figures standing over kneeling supplicants, bowls of something dark cupped in their hands. At the far end of the chamber stood a massive wooden table, stained black with centuries of use. Heavy iron restraints were bolted into the tabletop. Her stomach lurched. On the wall behind it hung a bronze crucifix. But the figure on it wasn't Christ. It was something else. Something twisted, with horns sprouting from its brow. She raised her flashlight higher. On the floor beneath the table, she saw a small pile of objects. Silver rosaries tangled with leather cords. A child's hair ribbon, crusted dark brown, and an antique camera, its cracked casing marked with dried fingerprints. She reached down, brushing the camera with trembling fingers. It was still warm. A noise behind her, a soft footstep on the stairs. Claire spun, heart hammering, her flashlight beam dancing wildly across the chamber. Sister Helena was standing halfway down the steps, her face pale, her eyes wide. "You shouldn't be here," Helena whispered, her voice cracking. "They'll know you came." "Who? What is this place?" Claire demanded. She struggled to keep her voice steady. Helena's gaze flicked to the grotesque crucifix. "It's older than this building, older than the church. They call it the Immaculate Witness." Claire felt her throat go dry. "Why? What are they doing down here?" Helena took a hesitant step closer. "They believe blood is the only true sacrifice, that only through offering it can you be cleansed." She swallowed hard. "My sister, she disappeared last spring. Mother Agnes said she had been chosen. I thought she meant for a mission, but she meant this." Claire's voice shook. "How many people?" Helena's eyes brimmed with tears. "Hundreds, maybe more. The town has always looked the other way." Footsteps echoed above them, muffled but growing louder. Claire's heart seized in her chest. Helena's voice was urgent now. "You have to leave tonight, if they find you here." But it was too late. A figure appeared at the mouth of the tunnel, silhouetted against the flickering candlelight. Mother Agnes. Her face was calm, but her eyes gleamed with something almost triumphant. "Sister Helena," she said, her voice as smooth as polished stone. "Return to your cell." Helena hesitated, then bowed her head and turned to go. Claire wanted to call out, to beg her to stay, but her throat closed around the words. Mother Agnes stepped into the chamber. Her gaze swept over the table, the camera, and finally settled on Claire. "You were never meant to find this place," she murmured. "But perhaps it is Providence." Claire backed away, her hands raised. "I'm leaving. Right now." Mother Agnes shook her head slowly. "No, Claire. You came here seeking truth, and tonight you will bear witness to it." She gestured behind her, and 2 more nuns appeared, blocking the exit. Claire realized with a sickening clarity that she might never see daylight again. They marched Claire up the narrow stairs, through the chapel, and into a chamber she hadn't seen before. It was a vaulted room lined with tall candlesticks and crimson banners embroidered with Latin prayers. At the center stood a circular stone basin, dark stains crusted around its rim. Mother Agnes gestured for Claire to kneel. Her voice was soft, but carried the certainty of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. "All your life, you have searched for meaning. Now you will see the one truth that binds flesh to spirit." Claire clenched her fists. "You're murdering people." Mother Agnes smiled faintly, as if she were scolding a child. "Purification is not murder. The Immaculate Witness accepts all who come willingly, or who are called." One of the nuns produced a length of coarse rope. Claire fought as they bound her wrists and forced her head over the basin's lip. From this angle, she could see into the shadows beneath the stone. Something shifted down there, something large enough to scrape against the basin walls. Her voice broke. "Please, don't do this." Mother Agnes touched her hair gently. "Your blood will anoint this sanctuary, as it has anointed generations before you." Just as Mother Agnes raised her hand in blessing, the heavy oak door creaked open. Sister Helena stepped inside, clutching a brass reliquary to her chest. Mother Agnes did not turn. "Helena, leave us." But Helena's voice was steady, louder than Claire had ever heard it. "No." Mother Agnes finally turned, her expression flickering with something like disappointment. "You would defy your vows?" Helena stepped forward. "I would save her." In one sudden motion, she hurled the reliquary at the nearest candlestick. Flames roared up the velvet banner. Smoke billowed toward the ceiling as the fire spread. For a split second, the nuns froze. Claire seized the moment. She wrenched herself free of the woman holding her and sprinted toward the door. Helena grabbed her hand. "This way." Together they bolted into the corridor. Behind them, Mother Agnes shouted a single command. "Seal the gates!" Helena dragged Claire through a maze of dark passages. Smoke poured into the halls, stinging Claire's eyes, choking her throat. Somewhere overhead, bells began to ring, an alarm that reverberated through the stone. "We can get out through the crypt," Helena panted. "There's a tunnel to the old cemetery." They turned a corner and stopped short. 2 nuns in dark veils blocked their path, arms outstretched. Helena's voice broke. "Please, let us go." The women stood in perfect stillness, their faces hidden. But then, without a word, they stepped aside. Claire didn't have time to wonder why. She clung to Helena's hand and followed her down a set of winding stairs. The crypt smelled of damp earth and something older, rot and iron and old sorrow. Their footsteps splashed through shallow puddles as they ran. At the far end, an ancient iron gate yawned open. Beyond it lay a narrow stone tunnel, its walls slick with lichen. Helena turned to her, breath ragged. "Go. Keep going until you see the daylight." Claire grasped her shoulders. "Come with me." Helena shook her head. "I have to stay. Someone has to end this." Tears blurred Claire's vision as she stumbled into the tunnel. Behind her, she heard Helena's footsteps receding into the darkness, and then the heavy clang of the gate slamming shut. Claire ran. The passage twisted and narrowed, the ceiling so low she had to crouch. Her flashlight beam wavered over rough stone etched with crosses, names, and dates she couldn't read. Her breath came in ragged sobs. She didn't dare look behind her. Every instinct screamed that something was following, gliding just beyond the edge of her light. Finally, the tunnel widened into a rough cavern. A shaft of moonlight shone down from a break in the ceiling. Roots dangled like skeletal fingers. Claire fell to her knees, gulping air. She pulled the old camera from her coat and checked the film compartment. Miraculously, the roll was intact. This was proof of everything. The names in the ledger, the chamber, the Immaculate Witness. Her hand trembled as she held the camera to her chest. Then from the darkness behind her, she heard a sound. A low, wet exhalation that was not quite human. The sound in the tunnel grew louder, like a great animal dragging itself through wet leaves. Claire forced herself to her feet, clutching the camera so hard her knuckles ached. Her breath was ragged, each step echoing off the walls as she stumbled toward the shaft of moonlight. Behind her, something exhaled again, a bubbling rasp that made her stomach twist. She didn't dare look back. She ran. Her boot caught on a raised stone, pitching her forward onto the slick ground. Pain shot up her arm as she scrambled to her knees, the flashlight skidding away into the dark. In the faint glow of moonlight, she saw the cavern walls shift, as if something vast was moving just beyond her sight. She crawled toward the broken section of the ceiling, heart hammering. Above her, cold night air drifted through a gap in the stones. She reached up, her fingertips brushing the rough edge of the opening. And then she felt it, a hand closing around her ankle. Claire screamed. She kicked wildly, heel connecting with something that yielded like wet clay. The hand recoiled. Summoning every ounce of strength, she pulled herself up, wedging her shoulders through the gap. Broken bricks tore at her coat as she clawed her way into the open air. Claire collapsed onto damp grass, the night sky spinning overhead. She rolled onto her back, gasping, the camera clutched to her chest like a lifeline. She was lying in a graveyard. Leaning headstones rose all around her, their inscriptions worn smooth by centuries of rain. Somewhere in the dark, a bell began to toll, deep and solemn. She staggered to her feet, every muscle screaming. Through the trees, she could see the abbey silhouetted against the flames that still licked its roof. She turned and began to run. Behind her, the bell tolled again. And from the open crypt, she heard a voice, Helena's voice, crying her name. She stopped, throat tight. Claire. But it was impossible. Helena had sealed herself inside. Had she escaped, or was this something else mimicking her voice? She took one step back toward the crypt. Then she heard the wet exhalation again. Closer now, almost at her shoulder. The decision made itself. Claire ran, never looking back. It was nearly dawn by the time she reached the sheriff's office in Marlow Hill. Her hair was matted with dirt and sweat, her coat torn, her hands streaked with drying blood. Deputy Morales was the first to see her. He spilled his coffee when she staggered through the door. "Ma'am, Jesus, are you hurt?" Claire tried to answer, but all she could do was hold out the camera. Her voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "It's all in here. Everything they did." The sheriff himself took the film to the back room to develop. When he returned half an hour later, his face was the color of old paper. Without a word, he laid out the photographs across the desk. The blood-stained altar, the restraints, the twisted crucifix. In the final frame, a figure loomed in the shadows, half seen, its skin slick and dark. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, the sheriff cleared his throat. "We'll have to notify the state police and the diocese. This is going to change everything." Claire nodded, too exhausted to reply. In that moment, all she felt was an immense, hollow relief. She had survived, but she would never be the same. Weeks later, when reporters came to interview her, she tried to explain what she had learned. Not just about the Abbey or the cult that had hidden there for generations, but about herself. She told them that evil doesn't always look monstrous. Sometimes it wears a kindly face. Sometimes it wraps itself in sacred words. And sometimes it thrives because good people look the other way. "If I learned anything," she said, her voice steady, "it's that you must never accept someone else's truth without question. Because sometimes the most dangerous beliefs are the ones we never dare to challenge." In the weeks that followed, St. Brigid's Abbey became the center of a media firestorm. News vans lined the gravel road. Investigators combed every inch of the property, cataloging evidence by the truckload. The state police sealed off the crypt. Special teams in protective suits descended into the tunnels Claire had escaped from. They found more than she could have imagined. Bones stacked behind false walls, relics stained with centuries of dried blood, personal effects that matched the names in the ledger. They called it the largest ritual homicide investigation in New York's history. Mother Agnes and 3 senior sisters were arrested without incident. When deputies found them in the Abbey library, they were kneeling in prayer. They did not resist. They did not deny a single accusation. But they offered no explanation for the figure captured in the last photograph. Claire stayed in Marlow Hill for 2 weeks after the raid. She gave her statement a dozen times. She answered every question the detectives asked. How she'd found the ledger, the hidden tunnel, the chamber with the basin. But there was one question she could never answer. What had she heard behind her in the crypt, and whose voice had called her name? When she finally left town, she carried only a small suitcase and the camera that had saved her life. She thought she would feel relief, closure. But what she felt was something closer to grief. 3 months later, in early spring, Claire returned to Marlow Hill one last time. Most of the reporters were gone. The Abbey's charred roof had been covered with blue tarps. The graveyard was still and quiet under a pale dawn sky. She walked among the headstones until she found the cracked slab that marked the entrance to the crypt. Someone had welded a steel plate over the opening. She ran her hand over the cold metal, her breath fogging in the morning air. In her pocket she carried a folded letter, one she had never shown anyone. It was signed in a delicate hand. Helena Bennett. "If you are reading this, it means you escaped," the letter began. "I want you to know that I chose to stay. Not because I believed in Mother Agnes, but because I believed someone had to end it. If I fail, please tell the truth, so no one ever forgets what happened here." Claire pressed the letter to her chest. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Then she turned and walked away from St. Brigid's Abbey for the last time. No one ever identified the figure in the final photograph. Some investigators insisted it was simply a trick of the light, a warped shadow distorted by decades of smoke and mildew. But those who were there that night said something else. They claimed that as the last of the nuns were led away in handcuffs, the bells in the chapel began to ring on their own. And from somewhere deep below the foundations, they heard a single echoing sigh. like something stirring after a long sleep. In the years that followed, Claire tried to move on. She took a job at a library in Boston, surrounded by the safe familiarity of old books. But sometimes, late at night, she would wake with her heart racing, sure she could hear chanting beneath the floorboards. People asked her why she risked everything to uncover the truth. She always gave them the same answer. Because silence is the oldest accomplice of evil. And when they pressed her about whether she believed something still waited in that crypt, she would only say, "Some questions have no safe answers." If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Never accept something just because it's wrapped in tradition. Never assume that a kind face means a kind heart. And never underestimate the power of your own voice. Because sometimes the difference between surviving and disappearing forever is the courage to stand up and say, "This is wrong."